mark making. What is mark making? It's the marks we make. They're the first marks. So I think they're the kind of the bones, the start of our art practice. So as far as visual language goes, that's kind of that can be used in a broader sense to describe the way that we convey information through visual imagery. I think as practicing artists, a visual language, the way I think of it is in a more specific way, like what are the forms that are coming through our art that we make. But what I'd like to do to start with today is show you some of my favorite mark making tools and just go through the things that I like to play with. Not all of them are brushes. Actually, most of them aren't brushes. A great way to explore your own kinds of mark making, and most of us have sort of characteristic mark making, the kinds of strokes that we make typically. Sometimes they reflect, how we're feeling, but they are, as you work further in an art practice, kind of your own characteristic marks, and we know that. We would recognize the certain marks of certain artists, like Van Gogh had a certain kind of mark making, a certain kind of brush stroke, for instance. And there are some artists that are particularly known for their mark making, for instance, the American artist Cy Twombly. So anyway, but a great way to explore mark making is to put a huge sheet of paper up on a wall and just make marks standing up, because then your body is more relaxed. It's a lot of fun, and you can explore different mark making tools that way. I have a video on my YouTube channel called mark making, and I do a demo of standing up and working on a large sheet of paper. So I'm going to turn my camera around and I'll show you some of my favorite mark making tools. I'm not going to work on the big paper today on the big wall behind me. So I'll turn my camera around. I love these Pit Pastel or Staedtler permanent markers for mark making. Here's my Pit Pastel pen. It's called a big brush pen. And they're archival and just great to work with and very responsive to the hand. If I was working large today, I might show you how fun it is to tape a brush to the end of a long stick and work with the brush a long way away from your hand. And anything to kind of introduce elements of surprise and lack of control, I sort of seek out. I love that kind of thing. So, and of course with these permanent markers, there's all kinds of different weights. These I use a lot more in my sketching, my sketchbooks, my sketching practice. Here's the Posca pens, which have acrylic paint in them. You can get refillable ones where you can put in your own inks or paints, like this one. This one's got antelope brown ink in it. So these come apart. You can put the, you have to use a very liquid or high flow or ink in these to get them flowing through the nib so that they don't gum up. And other tools that I like to create. My own brushes. So this brush is my favorite brush these days. It's made from a piece of rope wired onto a twig. So let's just see what happens with that. Put some paint on my palette. And I'll just dip the brush into this is a fluid carbon black. And you get these great, unpredictable, uncontrollable, scratchy marks. I sometimes use those in landscape for you know, brushy, shrubby, twiggy kinds of things. So that's fun. Oh, as far as more black mark making tools too, charcoal is beautiful. This is a charcoal pencil, but of course you can use just willow charcoal too. It tends to pick up as you move, you know, if you move wet paint over it, it'll pick up and smudge. Some people like that. I like to use actual twigs. So I collected this from my garden this morning. It's a bit damp because it's raining. This is acrylic black ink I'm using here. And I'm just going to show you the kind of lines that twigs make. I really love these broken, scratchy, unpredictable kinds of lines that you can get with twigs. And they're totally biodegradable, and they come in lots of different sizes. So I love to draw with twigs. How about a feather? Just going to dampen this paint a little bit, drag a feather through it, and see what happens. Again, you know, very unpredictable kinds of marks. Lots of fun. And I also collect all kinds of weird implements, things that you can find in your hardware store or your kitchen, maybe. For instance, this old potato masher, I think that's what these were. So this now introduces what I would call a visual language, a kind of strong visual language. It's very geometric and repetitive. You know, it poses quite, I think it has kind of a big voice, would create like a big statement in your piece. Remember those used to be in those buffets. The buffets, the chopped carrots. There are lots of things that can create these parallel lines. Of course, corrugated cardboard is great for that too. This is some kind of, I guess it's a whipper. Let's see what that does. Oh, those are kind of fun. Those little gestural marks. So, you know, have fun, explore these different kinds of sources for mark making. These are just, you know, for putting oil, kitchen implements. I've just forgotten the actual name of them, but they have all these, they're so bendy and flexible, and they've got all these parallel, they create all these parallel lines. So those are really great. I love that. And then there's just, you know, there's rollers and foam brushes like you get at the paint store, just cheap things. I actually haven't used this foam brush, so I'm going to just try it here. Obviously, we get a nice heavy line. But I like if it's not totally saturated, how you can get some kind of scratchy parts, a scratchy look to it. I use these cheap foam rollers a lot in my large canvas work, just to create, you know, big swaths of paint. So I'll just pull that over here. And what I like is when you don't distribute the paint evenly on them, so you get these kind of spots, and some places are saturated and some places aren't. So that's just, to me, just interesting mark making. And, you know, of course, you'd adapt these for your own practice in the way that you work. And, you know, mark making is a very personal part of our own art practice. So I'd like now to talk about making line drawings. So we'll go back to the idea of line. And what I really like to do is turn to the botanical world as a source of mark making, lines, forms, and visual, I guess you'd say visual language. The visual language of the botanical world is very, very appealing to me. I find it endlessly interesting and it's full of inventive source material. So today I'm actually going to work on this with this peony seed and leaves from my garden. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing this and using the technique of contour drawing, which is a technique which I'm not sure if some of you have never done it. It's really, really wonderful for many, many reasons. What we do is we look at our object, only our object, not our paper. It's quite hard to do at first. And we follow, usually start with the outer edges. Just follow the outer edges with our eye and our hand on our paper, of course, but not looking at what our hand is doing. And this teaches us to draw and only looking at our subject, which is, it teaches us to see. So learning to draw is learning to see. I'm going to draw directly onto a piece of paper I've prepared. It's good to do this, to warm up, always on a piece of scrap paper. And so, but this one is a gessoed piece of water media paper. Now you don't have to gesso your papers. If you're working with good papers, and for instance a watercolor paper is great. The better the watercolor the paper is, the better it is to work on. It'll be tougher. And but this one is a mixed media paper, kind of student grade, so I'm gessoing it just to make it a tougher surface to work on. And what I'm going to do, well, normally if I'm warming up with a contour drawing, if I'm trying to get to know a subject and thinking about it, trying to understand it, I'll do a number of contour drawings on scrap paper, big pieces of scrap paper. So I am going to just launch onto this piece of paper, though, with one of my drawing tools, maybe my Pitt Pastel pen. I'm going to use at least 3 different weights of drawing tools here. And you're just going to have to trust me that I'm not looking at my hand on the paper. I'm aware of it moving, but I'm just looking at my subject. I'm going to pull the subject out of view now. And I'm going to kind of try to blow up the shapes a little bit. This is just such a great way to teach yourself to look, as I said, to develop the connection between your eye and your hand, and to generate funky, abstract drawings. So, you know, this class, these play dates, are really about materials. So we're not going to dive into the fundamentals of formal botanical drawing here. That's another class, and I also do teach that at a local botanical garden. But what we're interested in here is generating kind of abstract, fun abstract drawings. So I'm just keeping my pen on the surface, moving continuously. It doesn't matter if things are attached, unattached. I'm also going to do some overlapping drawings. So I'll go back, I'll take a different view of this seed head. Maybe if you like a little bit side view. I'm going to just overlap these drawings. So I'm just creating a lot of lines, a lot of marks on my paper, and I'm not worried about making a lot of sense necessarily. Just having fun, and of course getting to know this subject. Sorry if I'm heading off the page sometimes. That's the problem with not looking at what I'm doing on the paper. I can't see what you're seeing. So let's try some of these leaves now. I'm just going to I'll grab a different weight. of pen, just for fun, maybe a finer one. And just because we're playing with our visual language, which includes, taking our tools and using them in different ways, taking our visual language and examining it in different ways. So I've examined it with a thick line, now I'm examining it with a thinner line. So the visual language is line, and we're flipping that line around in all kinds of different ways. I think the visual language of this subject also are the long ellipses of the leaves, and of course veining, which is a branching. That's also a visual language too. A certain kind of mark making, the branching that we get in the veins of leaves. So I'll do a few more up here as well. Another view of my seed head. I love these seed heads. They're almost like little jester hats or something. These are where the little tiny seeds were. Most of them have been shed already. These little spots here. So this is one of the other visual languages emerging from the subject, these little spots. So let me just pull that up a little closer for you. And so, like that, they don't make a lot of sense, although it does convey the language of plants. There's, this kind of radial symmetry, this sense of seeds. Certainly leaves are here, and veining. Other tools I could use would be my charcoal pencil. So I'll just put in a little bit more. And again, I'm looking at my subject, of course, which is off screen right now. And just keeping things going. I'm looking at the back of leaves now where the veins are really strong. And of course we get the branching in the veins, but then the branching of the stems too. Stems and twigs, like that. So now I have different kinds of mark weights, and just for fun, let's draw twigs with twigs. So here's my twig. I'll go back in again here. I've just dipped my twig in a black acrylic ink. So I'm kind of just making layer upon layer of these forms, these botanical forms. Now you may have something that you prefer to draw. Your visual language might lie in architecture or elements of landscape. And so as you do this exercise, you don't have to do botanical drawing. It's just that this is a source of mark making and inspiration for me always. All right, so the next step is going to take us into color. I have prepared one ahead of time, so I'm going to show you how I got to this place with this painting. I may have to just give this, my assistant isn't here in my studio with me today, so I'm just going to have to give this a quick dry with my blow dryer. Just pick up a little bit of that extra. Shouldn't take long. I'll be right back. So as you know, I really like to work with drawing gum, especially this very fluid PBO drawing gum, because I love the way that it allows us to preserve whites. I'm going to get a little bit of that. I'm going to grab one of my old brushes, and you've probably discovered now that you have to use an old brush for drawing gum. It tends to dry very quickly on the brush, and then it sort of just turns to rubber. So I'm protecting some of this, and I'm really trying not to be too picky, because we're working in abstraction here, and don't want to get too literal. But I'm also aware of kind of the distribution between what's going to be white and what's going to be colored. Some of the charcoal is lifting up here. You might see as I run my brush over that. And when I put some, I'm going to use some ink on this. When I put the ink on, we'll have the element of surprise, hopefully, because I haven't controlled this very carefully. When we lift up the drawing gum, then we'll have areas of white preserved. So I'll just give that a very quick dry with my blow dryer, and then we'll go into the next step. Okay, so now I'm going to use a transparent on this. And you can use a transparent heavy body paint if you want, or fluid. I'm going to use inks because I won't have to spend some time thinning those down. And they are very, very transparent and very intense. So I've still got a little bit of tacky drawing gum here, but that's okay. So the first one I'm going to use is a warm ink called Antelope Brown, and I'm also going to use a cool. So I'm sort of choosing warm and cool here, just because that makes an interesting combination. And let's try first of all the Antelope Brown. So I will put a little bit of water on the surface with a big soft brush, just to help the ink move easily over the paper, because this is a gesso paper too, so it's not like watercolor paper where the water kind of moves in a lovely way over and through the paper. Gesso's got a little bit of resistance, so I put just a thin layer of water on there. And here's the beautiful color Antelope Brown. Now I can spray that to help it move, or I can pick it up again with my brush to kind of help it move through the water. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous color. It's one of my very favorite acrylic ink colors. This is FW ink. And I'm just kind of letting it move over the surface. Sometimes I like to pick a little bit up so I get the sense of, some areas being lighter than others. And while it's wet, I can also drop some blue in. So this is marine blue. As I said, you could just thin down any of your heavy body paints too. So I'm going to have to get that with a brush because it's low. I'm low on it. I'll just grab it with a brush. but treat yourself to at least a couple of colors of acrylic ink, because it is so beautiful, so intense. So I'm just spraying it to kind of get it to move in an interesting way over and through the surface of the painting. And I could keep on working with that, letting it kind of drip down, mopping it up as it hits the bottom. This paper is taped down. Just makes it easier for me makes it stiffer so I can lift it and move it for you so you can see what's going on with the surface. So that you can see how beautifully those two mix together too. The antelope brown and the marine blue create green in places as well. So I'm going to actually set that aside. And now I'll turn to the one that I prepared. So this one isn't quite as intense. The first thing that I might do is put another layer on top. So at this point, we can continue to work in layers of transparency, much as we have in our layering work that we did earlier based on the first demo. And, you know, that is a beautiful way to work, with lots of layers of transparency. What happens, though, with a lot of layers of transparency is that I feel like eventually we have to use some opaques, introduce some opaques to try to calm things down a little bit. So I'm going to put another layer on top, and then I'm going to introduce a few opaques. And to make those opaques, I'll use white, black, and the colors that I've used in the painting, so that we get a kind of harmony inside the painting. I'll just see how much of this I can get by lifting my camera up a tad. There we are. So you can see I've got different weights of line like I had in the demo I did for you. And this is what happens when you pull off the drawing gum. You get these white pieces that are exposed. So now, what color? I really love orange, and I know that it's going to make some interesting neutrals as it hits the blue. So I'm going to try this fluorescent orange. Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was fluorescent that I was picking up. I do have a bit of a weakness for fluorescent colors. So I've just added a little water there so that the orange will not hit a dry surface. There we go. It's very orange. And let's actually, I think I'm going to get an orange that isn't fluorescent. I'm going to use this Indian yellow, which is almost orange. It's very warm. I'm just going to move it around a little bit so it's intersecting. So it's turning the blue underneath, which was that marine blue, green. And just, I can move it around with my brush, you know, where I want it to be. Pick it up in places. Now I'll dry this because I want to go into that idea of the using opaques to paint out extra activity. So now I've set up a kind of nice orange blue in places where the blue is still showing through. It's really interacting with the orangish tone of the Indian yellow that I put on. So we're getting a nice sort of complementary excitement there. We're going to talk a little bit more about color on Friday. So let's see what kind of mixes we can make with this. If you use mixes from the colors that you've already used in your painting, rather than grabbing something, a new color, your paintings will really be much more harmonious. So there's the Indian yellow, antelope brown, marine blue, ooh, a lot of marine blue. See if I can drink some of that up. It's so precious, I don't want to blot it up. These inks are a little pricey, but like I said, it's really worth getting a few of them because they're so beautiful to work with. Okay. And the other colors that we need are white and black. So I'm going to use, these are fluid acrylics. So other than most of my other colors, I use heavy body. Then I have inks, a lot of different colors of inks, but I do like to have the fluid black and white because they're just so easy to reach for. Okay, so let's see what kind of mixes we can get with that. We'll be able to get a surprising number of mixes. So there's just the pure blue with white, the yellow. So this is titanium white, so it's going to give us quite a lot of color. And the antelope brown. But we can also make mixes. So we get the green when we put the Indian yellow and the marine blue together. And with the antelope brown and the blue, we also get a green, a sort of more of a forest green. Sometimes it's hard to see the actual qualities of those until you actually add a little spot of white to it. So you can see that's almost a evergreen kind of green. And this is more like a leafy green. I'll hold those up to you actually. So you can see the color quality there. And then we can mix, what do I do with my brush? We can mix black in too. So basically you kind of want to see what everything mixed together in your palette looks like. Yellows and blacks make interesting dark greens, neutral greens. So, titanium white, we've been talking about whites a little bit lately. The zinc white is transparent, more transparent, and it's used a lot for mixes. Titanium white really gives us cover. So what if we create, just gonna add a little bit more pure tone here, create some neutrals, some opaque neutrals, to start painting out some of the activity, the extra activity in here. So one of the problems, or not problems, but challenges, results of working like this is that we create a lot of activity all over the surface. And this happened also with our layering exercise that we did. where you put on a lot of layers, and especially if you introduce something like a print, like a stencil, it creates a lot of patterning. And in order to create form in the painting, we might want to quiet some areas down. So I'm going to paint in behind some areas here, and maybe even pull out some negative shapes as I go. So I'll work down in here. So you can maybe see I'll go in and paint behind objects, kind of pull out those forms a little bit more sharply from the background. But we can also, as we paint out, we can create negative form too. So maybe I'll show that to you over here. I'll get a darker neutral, still working from my palette. I'm going to go over here and create a form by painting negatively. So I've kind of created a leaf form here. Let's make that into a stem so you can really see what I mean. So there's a stem. I've created a leaf and a stem there. I'm just going to carry on with my painting out some background, quieting areas down. So what if I go in here, for instance, and just, there's a lot of overlapping lines here. Maybe I just want a little bit more quietness. Now, it's a little terrifying, I suppose, to start putting in opaques. But it's a really important part of creating form and composition. When you're working like this with a lot of activity all over the surface and a lot of transparency, don't be afraid to put in some opaque areas. And if you watched this, you were at the Zoom yesterday, or you have had the chance to watch it, I talk about that, and I also show some examples of artists whose work I love and point out how they use opaques to create these quiet areas. So this is a white with the blue, marine blue, and titanium white. So now that flower is coming forward. And maybe I don't want it to come forward everywhere. I don't really necessarily want to go through the painting and pull all the pieces forward in the same way. This is where the intuitive process comes in. Just kind of what I like to do is kind of move around the painting. Don't worry too much about staying inside the lines. Give you permission to work outside the lines all over the place. But I'm kind of moving around, just sort of feeling really, where do I need that blue? Where would more of that blue be nice to put? This got a little dark. But again, usually I would, sorry, I'm working up there. Usually I would, work several layers, and maybe even introduce light again at some point. So that is your mission. Make some marks. Find some fun things to make marks with. Look around in your kitchen. Go to your hardware store. Maybe make yourself a crazy brush like mine with the piece of rope wired onto a twig. And just, play with mark making, and then do some contour drawing of whatever kind of subject you want to. And think about, as you go, what kind of marks are really the marks that you have marks that you characteristically make.